All right, there we are. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session, which has delightfully been called From Disengaged to Love. I assume that you all want more love in your lives, and that is why you've chosen this session. We knew that that would be a popular title. The discussion today is going to centre around how to bring NPS to life in your organisation. We're going to hear a bit about Bupa's journey, how they thought they were doing it, and in fact they weren't. And we're also going to spend a little bit of time talking about how to make the cultural change, how to get buy-in from executive leadership to make NPS part of the culture. So before I introduce our speakers, let's start with a polling question. Hopefully by this stage everybody has got a bit of a sense of how the app is working. So let's give it a try. The question is, are you running a true NPS system in your business? And the answer options are yes, no, and don't know. I wonder if we should repeat that at the end. See if we get a different answer. All right, so if you go to your app and you pull up this session, it should be pretty obvious how to vote. There we are, you figured it out, good for you. Dear oh dear, if it was the Australian Electoral Commission, they'd want a recount. People voting twice. This is rigged.
This is amusing.
Why don't we just let that emerge for a while, hey? That doesn't even add up to 100, does it? All right. I'm very pleased to introduce Mark Judah, who's a partner at Bain and Company. Please welcome Mark. And John Moore, who's a Director of Marketing at Australia and New Zealand Bupa. John, how would you have answered that question, say, 3 years ago?
I would have said yes, and at the end of this session I probably would have said no.
Right. He would have said yes, and then at the end he would have said no. So let's assume that around 40% of people understand it. Around 40% of people say, look, they don't understand it at all, and around 20% just put their hands up and say they don't know. So let's just start at the beginning then, Mark. What is the rationale for a Net Promoter Score, and why does it matter?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the first place to start is that the Net Promoter system itself it's a tool. It's a powerful tool, but it's a tool that companies use to really change the culture of a company, and it's to become a lot more customer-centric. The quote that's up there on the screen is, again, from the insurance industry, but I say the way that companies who do this really well think of it, which is it's a tool for achieving an end, and that end is being much more customer-centric.
Okay. And so, obviously, Bupa is very customer-centric. You're my health insurer. So you must be. So at the beginning of this journey, why did you think that would even be relevant for you?
Look, I think with anything you're dealing with, ultimately the customer is making a decision and you're delivering a service. You get to a point where you realise that if you're not actually delivering something, and the reason why that's called love is it's actually our goal was to be loved by our customers. If you're not actually trying to achieve something that separates you and differentiates you, then you're actually not going to be any different than anyone else. And then when you add to the layer across us, it's like, yes, it's a health insurer, but we're also the largest provider of dental facilities in Australia. We're the largest for-profit aged care provider across this market as well. It's how do you connect those pieces together? And for us, it was realistically the customer.
All right.
But it's easy to say, and that quote is quite powerful. The hardest thing is the cultural shift that comes with it. It was kind of interesting. We had a meeting was it last week with Rob Markey, who wrote the book with Fred Reichhardt around NPS, and he stared at myself, literally asked myself, and then my CEO was just, how many customers have you spoken to this week?
And you said? I
said none. Fortunately, I've got one today, and hopefully a few more. And my CEO said the same. And it was just one of those moments where we thought, yes, we've moved that cultural shift, but we still got more work to do, whereas that's just a given. Because he said, you've got this real gift that customers want to speak to you. So they've completed these surveys, they've filled out verbatims, they've actually taken the time. So why wouldn't you want to talk to them a little bit more?
All right, but I mean, this has been at the centre of businesses like superannuation and businesses like health insurance for years, figuring out whether they're servicing the needs of the clients and working out whether there's satisfaction there. Why is NPS any better a way of doing that than any other way?
Sure. So I will take a moment and just talk about what we mean by
Yes.
NPS. For many people, they'll be very familiar with the metric, which was the Net Promoter Score. It was powerful because it was just a very simple question, which is how likely are you to recommend? And it's different from satisfaction because that bar is actually pretty high. For you to be a promoter, that means you're going out and telling your family and friends about how fantastic Bupa is. So that's a very high bar.
Yeah.
It's a very simple question, and lots of companies have adopted this as a metric. One of our biggest regrets at Bain & Company was that it got called the Net Promoter Score, and what it was meant to be was the Net Promoter System. And that's to John's point, which is that the score is just a score. I mean, you could ask that, or you could ask a slightly different question, and you would still be doing the most important thing, which is just getting customer feedback.
And why is the point of whether or not I'm with Bupa, this is going to get a bit of a run here, but I'm with Bupa, I'd have to say I'm happy enough. I'm not thrilled, I'm not that excited. But why is asking me whether I'm likely to promote it to somebody else a better question than asking me whether I'm satisfied?
Look, I think the key is, think of the power we can have through you if you were, as you said, you're not dissatisfied, you're not really overly satisfied either. Imagine if you were actually positive. You were saying, when people ask you, and the reality is, and yes, we spend a lot of money marketing and trying to get customers to change their behaviours, but the reality is the biggest and easiest way to change behaviour is through friends and family and recommendations that come that way. So imagine if you in your influence circles were asked about health insurance and said, well, I'm with Bupa and they're fantastic. I'm so pleased I'm with them. The impact you would have on us is amazing. In reverse, if you go, I'm with Bupa and they're shit.
It's more powerful than any ad that you
is
can
even
put on
more
television.
powerful again. And that's really what this is built in. It's actually, if you think about it, it's how the corner store worked, 50, 100 years ago. It's just simply back down to recommendation.
But isn't that a bit of that's a very small section of experience. For people in superannuation, people are disengaged from superannuation because they don't think about retirement. I don't think about health insurance if I'm healthy. So if somebody asks me that question, it depends whether or not I've broken my leg lately, or it depends whether or not I'm 50 or over as to whether or not you're going to get either a strong positive or a strong negative out of me.
But I think that's where engagement becomes so important, and it's something that we're working a lot on in health from our health and care business. And frankly, I know this audience has a real challenge with this, which is how do you engage with your customers broader than just when they need you or they think they need you, because you
Right.
can. There's lots of advice we can give you about your health and care, which you may be interested in. So I think the other thing that's coming through from things like the Net Promoter System is this real need to actually have a conversation with our customers. The great thing is the digital world actually lets us do it more broadly. So whether that's through content, whether that's through social, or whether that's literally through your physical outlets, you can actually engage with someone far more broadly than you actually just when they need you for something. And I think that's the other piece that we're jumping ahead, but what comes out of a lot of these metrics is you don't want people sitting in the midpoint, because if a better offer comes along, they're probably going to take it up.
Yeah.
You actually want them, so you've got to work to make them care about you outside of those moments when they need you.
You've got to make them care about you outside those moments where they need you and feel strongly enough to say, Aussie Super's brilliant.
Yeah.
Bupa's brilliant. Okay, so continue, Mark.
So like I said, look, it's one of the common things that I would describe as a shame is that a lot of people actually focus on the metric. And you could ask a slightly different question. It's not that there's any magic in asking that question. What John was alluding to was the Net Promoter System. And so the purpose of this diagram is just to describe what are some of those elements of the system, because actually if you don't do the things that are described in this page, actually all you're doing is just asking another question.
I see.
Adding it to another feedback form probably, or another survey. And what makes the Net Promoter System so powerful is not just the metric, not just the leadership commitment, but what we call this sort of feedback learning loops. So it's great to ask you as a customer a question. If I don't do anything with that feedback, it actually doesn't help at all. It's even worse, because I've asked you for your feedback and then I've ignored what you've said. So we refer a lot to this sort of frontline feedback loops, how to frontline take that and actually do something with it to improve the service. And then structurally, as a business, if once you're collecting fresh feedback, you get lots of information from your customers. What do you do with it? So all our customers are complaining about, the look and feel of the website. They're all complaining about the way that you communicate to them. Well, how do you actually make those structural improvements? And the really important piece is they're actually doing something with the information. So you're using that information to change the way that customers are experiencing your business.
So just to give you some real life examples of how that could work. So we, for example, do a lot of work with our optical business. So every week our optical managers come together, review the feedback that's come in through the NPS survey, and then look at what they can solve and tackle. A real life example of that is we found that coming through in our optical business, that people who needed contact lenses were actually rating us a lot lower on a recommended scale than people who weren't. Through this inner loop, or these huddles that we run in our stores, we found out a really simple answer to it, which was, we have a 35-minute appointment we book with our customers. If you need a contact lens, it's a 45-minute appointment needed because of the extra testing. People were turning up, then being told, oh, but I want contact lens. Oh, you're going to have to come back for another appointment. So a really simple fix for the inner loop, which is built off the information we had, was when someone calls in to make an appointment, let's make sure we ask them whether they need contact lenses or not, and it completely transformed the numbers.
And who had that little light bulb moment? Who had that understanding?
Our people.
Yeah.
So it was actually our people, and that's the power that came through the inner loop, which is when we basically take our people, they go through the results for their store, or in this case it was the Melbourne stores, together and actually look at what are the verbatims that are said, how are they performing, and how are the analytics, and they actually try and look at what can we solve, what can we do. To give you a sense then how you take that to the outer loop is, then we had to look at how do we fix that in our online booking system, which of course the people in the store can't fix. So then it's feeding into the outer loop, or the more structural improvements to change the way we do things. And it's building those two together, but it's probably to me the best example of, it's not the number, it's actually the process, which is what I would have said 2.5 years ago. It's actually not the number, it's actually what you do around the number and how you do stuff with it that actually matters.
But hang on a sec, we've just all heard Melanie Hobson, right? And she was talking about how if you get diverse groups of people together in a room, you're more likely to be able to solve a problem. She was talking about an academic called Scott Page, who may well win a Nobel Prize for a work called The Difference, which is a mathematical equation that actually quantifies that if you have people of different intellects and diverse backgrounds in a room, you're more likely to solve the problem. And she gave the example of nobody could solve the smallpox problem, or the greatest scientific minds. It was the dairy farmer who said, my milkmaids aren't getting smallpox, who held the key to it. So you're asking people you've asked of yourself, not only to ask the question of the customer, but then to affect a cultural change inside your organisation where somebody in the front line says, well, if you idiots would take a minute to listen to us in the front lines, we could tell you that, at which point now you've rung the head of IT and you're changing the whole website. That's a revolution you're talking about.
Well, I think it's even broader than that. The first thing is we're bringing the customer into that first conversation. So through the survey and through the results, the customer is actually part of that diverse group who's actually doing stuff, coming up with ideas and pushing it. And also importantly, empowering our people to actually fix some of the things. And frankly, some of the things are quite goofy. We all have them, and fix them and make them work. Then there's the other piece, which is there's some stuff that you just can't fix within your store or within your call centre or so forth. And that's around how do you have that mechanism to take that up higher in the organisation, so where it can be calculated and evaluated. And that's really what I've become a real believer in this inner loop, outer loop, because it's actually where the rubber hits the road and where you make a difference in this. It's not, and that's why I'm so supportive of calling this Net Promoter System, because the reality is you can have NPS and not have that, and you'll get nowhere.
Yeah.
You'll have a nice score, which will move around and you've got no idea why. The insights team will have to explain why the number went up and why it went down, and frankly, it will make no difference at all.
Yeah. Mark, your thoughts on this point?
Look, I mean, I don't know that I would add much to that, just to reinforce what John's just said, which is, I mean, getting diverse people together to solve problems is actually what it's about. And getting the customer voice in that discussion is paramount.
So at once it sounds simple and it's incredibly difficult. How do you demonstrate to clients who are at once drawn to the notion of embracing the system and somewhat daunted by the prospect of doing it right, that it will actually have an impact?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, fundamentally this is about building a stronger business. And so one of the first things that we would suggest for any company that is going to embark down this route is that you've got to work on net promoter economics. We have a saying which is, when passion meets the P&L, there's normally one winner. And so it's great to be passionate about the customer, and we all know it's the right thing to do the right things for our customers or our members, but you've got to have the cold, sort of hard economics to back that up. And across different industries, different companies, the economics always prove out the same thing, which is there are huge disparities in the value of somebody who is a promoter in your business versus someone who's a detractor.
Right.
They consume more, they stay longer, they're less likely to be attrition risks, and frankly, they tell others. So the word of mouth helps you actually gain new business as well. And that's, I think, a fundamental first step.
To measure it.
Yes, you've got to link it back to it's going to drive profitability for the business.
Okay.
So for us, for example, was it's up there.
What was the slide?
The next one. A promoter is worth 1.9 times what an extreme detractor is to our business.
Can everybody hear? Is that
So
you all can hear out there? I'm struggling to hear. Everyone can hear?
So I think for us, that was probably the thing that really changed the conversation at the exec table. We all agreed it was the right thing to do, but it wasn't until we actually had the numbers in place that it suddenly really made a difference. And, you know, the reality is they spend more. Interestingly, and the insurers sometimes freak at this, they claim more. So it costs us more money, but it's the right kind of cost, because it actually makes them actually appreciate what they've got. They stay longer. Importantly, they refer more, and they also buy more. So they buy other products. And whilst it's actually not including the 1.9 times, but the reality is they will cost us a lot less, because they are, if someone is complaining or upset or is not happy or is churning, there is a cost associated with that just keeps mounting up. So for us, it was that first stepping stone to actually pushing that culture change through, was proving that this actually made a difference financially, as well as what you would think logically.
Proving it to whom?
CFO is normally the hardest one to get across the line. But I think it's rare to have anyone in an exec team who doesn't, to Mark's point, have that combination of what happens in my P&L and what do I believe is right. Now, look, we have a real luxury in Bupa in the sense that we don't have shareholders and we exist for a purpose, which is longer, happier, healthier lives. So we do have more flexibility than some companies. But in reverse, you know, it's still grinding that into the psyche that the customer comes first and foremost. And I'd actually say customer and our people are the two that you really need to link. So, you know, if you're talking about a change, if I think, 2 years ago on the executive team, we would talk about NPS and other things, but we'd always start with what was our revenue for the month, what was the EBIT and so forth. 2 weeks ago at our last exec meeting, we spent half the morning, first part of the morning, focused on our employee status NPS and our customer NPS before we even started on the numbers. And it totally changed the way in which that conversation actually happened around our revenue and profit.
There's a question on the screen here. We get many members saying they like our fund, but would never recommend a super fund. Is NPS the best measure in the world of financial advice, Mark?
So first I'd say, I'm not going to claim it's the best measure in the world. I think it is the right measure because I think it's simple, it's intuitive, and having looked at this across industries, including very much in financial services, the economics stack up. And so part of the work that I would encourage anyone to do is, again, it's sort of do the economics. I mean, at Bupa, I know, John, you started with promoters, passives, detractors, and actually discovered there's this group in Bupa of extreme detractors who are very bad for business. In the super industry, it's not the kind of product that customers normally will go out of their way and members will go out of their way to say that they love. But I would be confident, and having done it in other wealth managers in Australia, when you do the economics, you still see that it's your promoters who invest more, who buy more products and stay longer with a fund.
And just to add to that, like when we kicked this program off, we set ourselves a goal that we wanted to be loved by our customers. To achieve that, the first thing we did was went out and asked them, could you love us? Fortunately, they could. My question back to that is, it's actually not whether NPS is the right tool or system for you. It is try to understand why wouldn't someone recommend your super fund? That's your first problem to actually investigate and understand. NPS isn't going to solve you. You can have happy customers, but realistically, what's the goal that you're trying to achieve here? And that goal is really whether it's to be loved or liked or recommended. I'd actually take the time to understand why wouldn't they ever do it? Because
the government keeps changing the rules on super, because there's all that going on in terms of people's whole attitude to retirement savings and the structure set up, and what could one small super fund hope to achieve in such a maelstrom?
It's always dangerous when I've spent most of my life in financial services, but never in this country, so it's probably safer for me to comment. But
Mark?
I think it's a great opportunity, frankly. I sit here, it was when I was invited to this conference, was like, I've got a truckload of money with someone probably in this room, actually 4 people in this room.
You can roll all those together, you're aware.
Who's never spoken to me other than sent a statement I couldn't care less about, has never cared about me, and frankly causes me to think about what the government says about it, because the government talks more about where I have my money than my super fund does.
Yeah.
So I just sort of sit here thinking, I see why the government gets all the noise, because my super fund never talks to me.
Harsh.
It's very harsh, but it's true.
I mean, just to put a sharp edge on it, I mean, there are certainly companies, global companies, who look at the Australian market and say, wow, there's a massive pool of funds there. The incumbents in the super industry don't really have customers who love them, and mostly have members and customers who are disengaged. There's an opportunity there. And so I think, whereas in the past the super industry has competed a lot on, well, I say many elements, a large part of that has often been returns, and customer experience has to be the next battleground.
All right. There we are. There's an interesting one. We'll just ask this question, then we'll come back to the Bupa journey. Are customers tired of providing feedback to companies? Personally, I have stopped completing satisfaction surveys as I don't want to give away my precious time.
Yes, and so what we often see is when companies start using something like a Net Promoter System, they throw out lots of surveys and replace it with one question, because it asks, would you recommend and why? And there's a lot more power in the why, when people say what they want, than filling out 20 different questions about different elements of the value proposition and how they correlate.
Yes, with that little thing saying you're 80% through our zillions of questions. All right, so take us back to the journey that Bupa went through. So you started at the beginning,
So
you thought you were doing it, and when did the light bulb go on that you actually weren't doing it in the way that was most effective?
We did the economics, saw it was worth value, and frankly, it was when we discovered this lovely thing called customer episodes when we realised we weren't doing it properly.
That does not sound good, a customer episode.
So the reality is we were tracking really well. So we asked them, you opened an account, you had a call centre inquiry, you used our online tools, you checked your mum or dad into our aged care facility, you had a root canal, you had everything. And we're doing really well at that, what we call transactional moments. But when we looked at our overarching strategic NPS, we weren't doing as well. So people, which is just a general question to people whether they use this or not. And what we were able to show...
But I'm just confused.
Yep.
I used you and I got a claim back for a root canal. How's that different from the strategic question?
Well, the difference is you made a strategic word means you may not have used this at all.
Okay.
So you may just be, to your point,
Yeah.
which we just dropped down. The biggest thing we found was this amazing drop-off when we looked at our customers. So we decided to focus on our new customers, just to understand what happened in that first 200 days. So day one, a customer joins. They're very, very happy. NPS scores are in the plus 50s and more, and everyone's a happy little camper.
Because they want to believe they made the right decision
Correct.
and that they're not a fool for
Yep.
having joined up.
By day 21,
Oof.
they weren't so happy. And,
What did you do?
well, we might have sent them 3 joining kits, we might have screwed up their payments. They certainly haven't claimed, so they haven't had a bad
Yeah.
experience. We've just allowed other parts of our business to actually get it wrong, and no one's owning that experience across those whole 21 days because we're big. There's different parts of the business doing different pieces of it, and the salesperson may not have taken down the credit card correctly.
I see.
And let's be honest, when you buy something, you don't fully understand what you're buying, and then when you get it home, you then call someone up and you may get a different story. So the journey goes right through to day 200, where it's probably not looking as positive. And this was our big aha moment, which was we've been focusing on the transaction. So we were patting ourselves on the back saying we're doing a good job because new customers, when they join, are really positive about Bupa. And then going, but why, if they've been there 3 years or whatever, weren't they as positive? And it was because we weren't owning these episodes.
And these are episodes beyond, I've just gone to the dentist and I've just had my tooth drilled out and I've just handed over the Bupa card and I've just got some money back.
Yeah, or even simple things. So just take the dentist. So you go to a Bupa dental practice, you have a root canal and the dentist basically, you swipe your card, you're happy with your payment, you go home. And then suddenly you go, now, how long before I can chew hard things? What can I do? And then suddenly it all changes because that follow-up or that ability to provide information wasn't there. Another thing that came out of these huddles was for our dental work, we actually working out how do we send a text to our customers post a treatment, advising them on what they should do in that next day, because that then suddenly detracts if they chip their tooth and they have to go back. Because the reality is, if you've had a root canal, you're probably not listening to the dentist at the end of it over what you can eat and what you can't. So it's all around owning that end-to-end piece and thinking that through from a customer's lens, rather than just focusing on each transaction as a point in time.
That's very challenging because now you're saying that you're not only responsible for insuring them, which is actually your job, but you're actually in charge of ensuring that they have a good experience, professional experience with a dentist.
Well, this dentist we own, so we would expect that you do. We can't control the experience they get in the dentist, but we can very much control, using the information they provide us, what happens post. And to be fair, we do actually do accreditation of dentists, so it does play into that piece.
Okay, so you have to own that.
Yeah,
Mark?
you have to own it.
Yeah, so I think it's a great example that you gave John, and I think you also see the exact same thing play out across completely different industries. The most classic example is I'll phone into a contact centre with some problem. They'll say, that's okay, we'll send out the technician. I'll get asked, were you happy with that? I say, oh yes, I'm very, very pleased. But then the technician never turns up. I don't get whatever it was I asked for. And it's the point which is I can have a great interaction, but if you don't deliver on the thing that I as a customer actually wanted to achieve, then you haven't really met my need. And if you haven't met my need, I'm not actually walking away as a promoter of your business.
Relate that to superannuation, that experience there.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, superannuation, I think for many people, they have infrequent interactions with superannuation. Sometimes they'll be calling up because they want to make a transfer from another fund into that fund, or they'll be calling up because they've got a question or change their investment mix. To ask a question at that point in time, which is, would you recommend us based on that interaction, it might be great. But if I've just said I'm going to change my investment allocations, until I've actually seen that that allocation has been changed and it's gone through in my next payment, it's not complete for me as a customer as an episode. All I've done is had an interaction.
Yeah. All right, so that was the next part of the journey. You've convinced the CFO, you've convinced him or her that detractors are much worse for the business than promoters, and we need to do something about this. You've done some basic stuff about, you've got the emoticons there explaining very simply to us what goes on. What do you do next?
So what we decided to do was build basically the infrastructure to actually run the inner and outer loop, starting with one episode, and one episode we could own. Because realistically, once you build it for one, you build it for many, and you can keep rolling it out. So we, because also this is about communicating to people. So across Australia, we're about 17,000 staff, and it's how do you get that out there? So we just put our marketing hats on. So first piece was looking at, we called it the perfect start. And so we actually are owning that episode, which is that customer joining. More importantly though, we built that into our REM piece. So 15% of every person on the executive REM program in Bupa Australia and New Zealand is impacted on how we perform at the perfect start. And to answer one of the questions there was, how do you connect the multiple episodes?
So the question on the screen is, how do you truly connect the insight over multiple episodes to those responding to customers in the moment?
The first thing is you connect the people who own pieces of those episodes to want to connect, and REM is a very good way of doing that. So, because there's some real skin in the game, and there's a real belief that it actually matters. So for us, and that's the journey we're on this year. So that's why I said we're still very much on that journey, but our 2016 goal is to perfect the perfect start for our customers, and importantly for our employees. Because my other learning through this whole process has been, you can't look at your employee sat separate to your customer piece, because the reality is, particularly when you're delivering an experiential product, there's nothing you actually hold or touch from Bupa. You actually receive a service, and you receive a service through people. So if your people don't love working at Bupa, you've got no chance of having your customers loving to deal with you. And it's connecting the two. So we've actually brought both of those programs to work together. And that's how we now start our executive meetings every month, is on those two pieces.
There's an excellent question on the screen here too. Do Bupa members look at their members only, or their service providers as well, when assessing their member experience?
The reality is our customers don't differentiate.
Right.
We don't today collect satisfaction on non-owned businesses, but I know there's NIB are linked with a thing called White Coat, which is around trying to do a TripAdvisor type thing for medical professions and so forth. It's something that we are interested in, but to be fair, our first focus is actually looking at our own provision and our own capability before we take it to the next level.
Okay. And so, Mark, you've been part of this journey too. coming to the point of recognising that you have to own the whole experience. How have you helped translate that into some practical change at Bupa?
I'll say at Bupa and at a number of other organisations, I think that everyone comes from a slightly different starting point.
Yeah.
And as John described it, I think in Bupa they already had quite a customer-centric culture and certainly a focus at certain interactions of taking on board and acting on customer feedback. So for Bupa, I think a lot of that has been about trying to take more of a customer episode view, which is the full customer experience. For many other companies, I'll say they're at sort of step one, which is starting with how do I really understand this drives the economics of my business?
Yeah.
What's the infrastructure that I need to put in place? I mean, literally to get, for the front line, fresh feedback, to get the feedback aggregated, to be able to make more structural improvements. And I can't emphasize enough just how important that fresh feedback is. There's a huge difference between someone telling you, I'll give an example of a bank, like, customers really like it when you call them back and you're responsive and you get in touch. And everyone says, yeah, I know that. But then they don't do it. But when they get feedback from their customers telling them that they're not doing it, people actually respond a lot more. So getting the infrastructure in place is typically a large component. And then for many companies, the journey has a number of different phases. So the most common place to start is we fix all the pain points.
Right.
So we figure out that in day 1 to 21, actually we messed up your payment and we gave you 3 cards. And companies see normally, I say, large increases from fixing pain points. The second part of the journey is typically now we've fixed a lot of pain points, how do we go from good to great?
Yeah.
And that's where companies really need to take, I'll say, a much more fundamental view of customer experience, because you can't just incrementalise your way to great.
And so how did that part play out? Now you haven't sent me 3 cards, you're not debiting somebody else's credit card. That's the low-hanging fruit. Where did you move? Give us some sense of where you moved.
It's actually the low-hanging fruit, but it's also quite hard to fix because that's some of your core systems that you actually have to change. So, like, my favourite Facebook shot ever was someone put up on Facebook a picture of the 5 welcome kits that he received. Beautifully posed it and it was looking very good on our Facebook site for a couple of days. Yeah. So that has actually been, fixing the payment system and the receives multiple kits is actually real out-of-loop stuff. It's actually a full transformation program around changing some of our core systems to do it. You can always get people in a short term to intercept things and to fix things, but it's actually quite complicated. Look, for us, it's actually around making things simpler. We're the first to admit that whether it's health insurance, whether it's aged care in particular, it's extremely complicated and we probably haven't helped the situation, and it's changing that entire culture within the business to actually simplify and to think first and foremost, what would a customer think? And I think a lot of that is built around the way in which design and work. So yes, you empower your frontline people, which is very important, you do. The other thing is actually working in a different way. So we're using a lot more what we call human-centered design in terms of how we design our websites, how we design our digital experiences, how we design our customer experiences, and putting real ownership over these episodes. So across our business, we have episode leads whose sole job is to own those episodes. I think the other thing, and there was a question that came up before about...
Yes, about how you divide it across the business.
Business units. My favourite line that I use to my peers is, I've never once heard a customer talk about a business unit. You just have to get over yourself because we structure the way we structure, and all companies will have different operating models, but the reality is a customer doesn't care about our operating model. They care about what they want. For us, when the blue cube goes on a building, there is a responsibility that comes with that blue cube. If it's on a website, it's the same thing. So our customers will set expectations whether we like it or not. And sometimes they set really high expectations.
Well, and that goes to the next point on the screen, doesn't it, Mark? Which is many smaller funds outsource their call centre function, meaning less control over a key member interface. How do you then own the whole experience if you've outsourced the first experience?
Agree. It's always a trade-off. I think to John's point, the customer doesn't care. I mean, you're supposed to deliver me a service, and I expect you to deliver that service. Certainly, a lot of companies do insist on, I'll say, the right measures, including things like NPS, in their contracts with outsourced providers, or at the very least, a number of measures which are there to help me determine that I'm getting the right quality customer service, as well as time, cost, and a number of other metrics as well. But the customer doesn't care, so it's your problem to figure out how you do that.
All right, so now you've scratched your head a whole lot about the low-hanging fruit, and it turns out it's a lot harder than you thought, because you're actually going to have to do a whole heap of stuff behind the scenes to iron that out. How do you go from great to good with members who are disengaged? How do you actually do that? They're not about to retire. Now, when in the health insurance example, you could send me a text, you've never sent me a text, but you could, saying, hey, Four Eyes, if you want new glasses, now's the moment to do it before the end of the year. That's an idea, you could do that. But I mean, how many opportunities are there to delight me and make me love you if I'm well?
There's more than you realise, and it's also things about what we do with our profits. So telling you about that. So and that's where content comes really into play. So some of the stuff we do, and particularly if you take, for example, there's a great story which we have the largest health foundation in Australia, or privately held health foundation, and we did a lot of work with Royal Far West about delivering basically voice coaching over the web into rural and regional schools, and we start telling stories about where your profits go. So there are other ways in which we can do that. We also talk about, and there's a gorgeous video on Blue Room, which is our content site, around the fact that we're one of the few aged care providers that actually allow pets in our facilities, and the stories of the dogs going through one of our who visits all the residents every day is just absolutely beautiful. So I do think there are things you can do that doesn't relate to just your health. It's how you're making a difference. And that's why one of our real goals is to make a difference in health and care. And it's one of the reasons why we exist. And I think as long as it's genuine and authentic and not manufactured, you can actually have quite a big impact from that love piece. And it was interesting, when we asked our customers, could you love us? They actually gave us 3 things that we had to do. One, they wanted to hear about our breadth of our health and service offering, health and care offering. 2, show me how you are making a difference in health and care. And 3, which is your point, be there when I need you. The first 2 actually had nothing about what you were getting today. They just wanted to know what we were doing and how we were doing it.
Who are you?
Who are we?
I was just going to add to that, and I'm going to part answer the question that's up there.
So the question up here at the moment
the previous question I meant.
Yeah.
That one's changed.
All right.
There was another question, but to the point of the measure, the relevance to an industry, a lot of companies actually start by saying, well, who are our peers?
Yeah.
And is it a relative game or an absolute game?
That's right.
That we're
All
playing?
we have to do is outperform our,
That's right.
our nearest peer.
Right. So one is, it's okay. I'm not the slowest. If I can outrun the slowest, I won't get eaten by the lion. Depending on your industry, that cannot be very aspirational at times to be win the ugly contest. So it's who are the right peer set? What does great really look like? And I think for an industry like Super in Australia, there's obviously a set of local competitors. I mean, there are companies who I'll say do fantastic and have incredible customer advocacy and loyalty. Companies like Schwab, companies like Vanguard, also in the investment management space. I think there's a lot to be learned by looking beyond your narrow peer set to a broader peer set.
And what do they do that's different?
I think fundamentally one of the things that's difficult in the Australian market and is more different with some of those global players is the level of engagement. And engagement comes in many ways, but engagement is very much encouraged. And they often go out of their ways to do many things that help prompt that engagement. In Australia, I'm sure everyone in the room would probably agree, we're all a lot more passive, myself included as a, as a member of an industry super fund. I'm actually a lot more passive with my investments here than I ever was when I was living in the UK and investing with Fidelity. And there's no great reason for that, actually. That's the challenge.
Yeah. All right, there's other questions on the screen. We might bring up the house lights and see where the questions lie in the room as well before we're out of time. There's a question here on the screen. You mentioned NPS for members and employees. Do you conduct NPS for employer or B2B client relationships?
We don't have a big B2B business. Most of ours is direct to consumer. We do have relationships with some businesses who then basically on-market our health insurance product to their employees. And we are starting to do a bit more NPS work in that space, but that's probably been the last piece of the puzzle that we're closed off. So we sort of went customers, employees, and then the next piece would be that B2B space.
Yeah. All right, go on.
I was actually just going to say, I mean, the companies who are B2B companies, absolutely yes is the answer. And the trick there is it's tightly integrated into account management disciplines. I mean, again, it's so natural. You're asking your customers for feedback. Integrating that into account management and the way that you manage those B2B relationships is, it fits really nicely.
All right. We have microphones. Just if we could bring the microphones in so folks can see where you're standing. Walk right into the room if you would, right in between the tables. Questions in the room? Particularly questions drawing this back to what this might mean for super would be interesting. There's a question there in the middle of the room, is there? Here, we have a question at the front of the room here. Terrific. Maybe just a little bit more house lights. We're just a little bit in the dark here. It's a bit disco.
Disco and waiting.
This is not a super specific question, but I'd be interested in just a portrait of a company that's got a positive Net Promoter Score.
Very good. A portrait of a company with a positive Net Promoter Score. What does it look like?
Okay, so there are lots of companies with positive Net Promoter Scores. Probably the best example in Australia, actually, and I'll say the best example of a turnaround in Net Promoter Score would probably be the story of Telstra, who went from being probably one of the most hated companies across the country to one where not only are they obviously miles above their nearest competitors, but actually are in positive territory. And have seen that come through in obviously their financial results as well as their customer results.
And how did they do it?
A lot of the things that we were literally just talking about. To John's point, I mean, first is it's part of everyone's REM, so they're all very focused on it. They have, I'll say, the system embedded very much in how they work. They have not only a way of capturing frontline feedback and making structural changes, but they do take an episode lens. They spend time looking deeply at customer insights to actually redesign services. So redesigning core processes around the customer. One of a very simple but I think kind of powerful example is looking at an episode which was order to activation. When I call up to say I want my broadband, there are two types of people. There are people who want it as soon as possible, and there are people who want it on date X.
Yeah.
So why don't we have two different processes for how we do that? So they've invested very much in understanding their customers and improving customer experience and focus on the things that matter most.
And look, we spent a lot of time, and we continue to spend a lot of time with Telstra. It was, again, learning from what they've done well and how they've done it, but it's like everything. If it doesn't start, if that executive team aren't 100% behind the change in culture that this is going to require, like, it is really difficult for a CEO to start off and dedicate a decent chunk of a meeting time of his executive team to focus on the customer and its people before you get into profit and revenue. That's just culturally something that, you know, we've been trained over a generation. You start with the numbers. The thing is, you start with the numbers, but the numbers that really matter. and drive your long-term outcome, which is your people and your customers.
And have you been able to point to the CFO or anybody else who maybe, I don't want to defame your CFO, who maybe was a little bit doubtful about this process and say, all right, we've put in all this effort, here's the result. Have you seen the results?
We see the results in the NPS numbers. We see the results in the fact that so you take us for a health insurer, we're now the largest health insurer by revenue in Australia, and we're continuing to grow quite dramatically. So I think whether you look at across, whether it's our aged care business, our optical, dental, GP or health insurance business, we're seeing the results in the numbers, and that's the important piece.
You are seeing the results?
Yes, totally. But I think also we believe in it, and I think that's been the big change, and Mark's witnessed it from belief with trepidation to now just belief would be, I'd say, the biggest piece of the journey.
Yeah.
For all of us.
Yeah. Other questions on the floor? There's lots of questions coming through on the feed. Here we are, another question just on the front table here.
Oh, I like the top question.
Thank you, Naomi Edwards. Many not-for-profits have not historically had REM systems based around bonuses and, NPS outcomes. If you don't have, remuneration based around achieving particular KPIs, what do you think is the most important thing to actually drive this cultural change through an organisation?
Biggest thing to drive cultural change in the organisation?
Well, it's hard to say what's the one biggest thing to drive cultural change. I certainly think that, first of all, it's going to sound a bit motherhood, but it absolutely all starts at the top. So I've never seen a company that's successfully driven a real cultural change without it being the personal passion and the hallmark of the leader. There are a number of things that I think companies do that make the difference, and at the heart of that, through all the kind of the terminology, is just you're somehow hardwiring it into people's routines of how they do business. Whether it's a huddle in a store, optical or dental, whether it's a team that starts their meeting by saying, we'll talk about the customer for the first 10 minutes, or whether it's the CEO who says, I'm not only going to have a quarterly performance review, I want a quarterly advocacy review to talk about customers. It's those routines that actually change the culture more than posters and anything else that you might do.
Another question here.
John Bailey. Question, where does the board come into this?
Yeah. Where's the board in all this?
Our global board actually, as part of our annual strategy day, or strategy 2 days we do at the board in London, actually requires us to give an update on where we are with Net Promoter System and how we're actually impacting the customer outcome. Locally, so globally we do it annually on that piece. From a local perspective, of the 7 board meetings we have over the year, customer is presented and represented there probably about 5 of the 7 meetings in the fullest level, and the other 2 it's probably a little bit quieter because they're much more around closing off the accounts and so forth. The other thing for us is it always comes through with that clinical impact piece as well. So we've always been really good on the clinical side. It's driving the other piece that drives the matter. But the board and both our chairman in Australia and our chairman in London are big supporters of it, and also always extremely curious about how we're performing and where we're going.
All right, and a final question perhaps from the screen. Blue Room is great. What's Blue Room?
Blue Room is our content site. So it's a content around health and care content.
Okay, and the video content on your website?
There's video, there is advice like, what sort of mouth guard should I get my kid, and stuff like that, yeah.
So Blue Room is great. How do you measure the direct impact good content had on NPS? Great question.
Today we don't, but Bain had their annual NPS session in Sydney 2 weeks ago, was it, or a week ago? I wasn't there, but I heard that Lego, who are one of the big players in NPS, actually have flipped an NPS measure from the actual product to their engagement in content because they believe the importance of it. So it's something that we're actually wanting to look at, because I think the big difference in today's world over maybe 5 years ago is customers used to go through a really nice little structured cycle, which was, you know, awareness, consideration, purchase. Now it almost starts with engagement. So
you can measure your engagement with customers by how they engage with the content you give them. It's fascinating.
And that's what Lego have found. So that's the bit. So we are not there yet, but I'm actually really intrigued to find out more, and Mark knows this.
Fascinating. All right, can I remind delegates to rate this session and provide any feedback on the app? I'd like to thank both Mark and John and announce to you that your speaker gift is a donation to First Nations Foundation.
Fantastic.
Right.
So please thank the gentlemen very much.